One of the typical questions is whether a measure falls under SPS or TBT. The scope of the two agreements is different. So the SPS agreement covers all measures whose purpose is to protect one of the following. First, human or animal health from foodborne diseases. Second, human health from animal and plant-carried diseases. Third, for example, animals and plants from pests or diseases. And finally, the territory of a country from damages caused by pests. The TBT agreement covers all products, so all technical regulations on products as defined in the agreement, except when such regulations constitute an SPS measure as defined in the SPS agreement. So the various measures that we have just talked about. Focusing now on some examples, you may have a measure on fruit, for example. An SPS measure would be a regulation on the treatment of imported fruit to prevent the spread of pests. A TBT measure on fruit would be, for example, a regulation on quality, grading, packaging and labeling of imported fruit. You may have a measure on food, labeling. An SPS measure would be directly related to the food safety aspect. A TBT measure would be a regulation on nutrition facts, for example. You may have a measure on bottled water. An SPS measure in this case would relate to materials that can be used for human health safety reasons. Requirement, for example, could be that no residues of disinfectant should be remained in the bottle so that the water is not contaminated. A TBT measure would be related to the permitted size to ensure standard volume or to the permitted shapes of bottle to allow stocking and displaying. Now, moving to international standards and the differences between SPS and TBT agreement, the first thing to say is that both agreements encourage members to use international standards. So this process is often called harmonization. They encourage members to participate in the work of international bodies for the preparation of international standards. The SPS agreement requires members to base their SPS measures on international standards where they exist, except under specific circumstances. However, if the national requirements result in greater restrictions on trade, a member may be asked to provide the scientific justification demonstrating that the relevant international standard would not result in the level of health protection that the member considers appropriate. The SPS agreement specifically names 3 standard-setting institutions: the Codex Alimentarius Commission, the World Organization for Animal Health, the so-called OIE, and the International Plant Protection Convention, the IPPC. They are mentioned in Annex A of the SPS agreement. The TBT agreement says that members must use international standards as a basis for their technical regulations unless they are ineffective or inappropriate to fulfill a policy objective. This may be, for example, because of fundamental climatic and geographical factors or fundamental technological problems. Unlike the SPS agreement, the TBT agreement leaves each member with the choice to decide which international standard is relevant in a particular situation. In addition, while the TBT agreement does not contain a precise definition of an international standard-setting body, it does define an international body or system as a body or system whose membership is open to all the relevant bodies in at least all members. In the year 2000, the TBT committee decided on a set of principles and procedures that should be observed when international standards, guides and recommendations for the preparation of mandatory technical regulations, conformity assessment procedures and standards are elaborated. Both agreements also recognize the importance of equivalence, which is when a member accepts that regulations different from their own fulfill the same policy objective, even if through different means. Other provisions are related to transparency and provisions for developing countries. Both agreements set various transparency obligations. They require members to notify any new or modified regulations when they are not based on international standards. In addition, both agreements require that this notification should be submitted when the regulation is still in draft form, so that trading partners have an opportunity to comment. Each member must also set up an inquiry point, which is an office to provide information on SPS or TBT measures. And members can have access to all notifications and other relevant information on SPS and TBT through the WTO website, on which you should look for the information management systems for SPS and TBT. The SPS agreement and the TBT agreement as well contain several provisions on special and differential treatment for developing countries and LDC members. These provisions aim at assisting these countries with difficulties and challenges that they may face in the implementation of the agreements. They also include provisions on technical assistance.